The synthetic snow fell in perfect, programmed flakes, drifting across the cracked window of David Beck's small prefab, home like a cruel imitation of the winters he remembered from Earth. Outside, the artificial wind moaned against the steel walls of New Haven Colony, a sound both hollow and endless. A reminder that even weather here was mechanical simulated nostalgia for a world he'd never see again. Inside, the faint hum of the heating unit battled to keep the chill at bay. David sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, surrounded by a scatter of unpaid bills and empty ration packets. His reflection in the tabletop's dull metal showed a man worn down by gravity heavier than the planet's grief, exhaustion, and the quiet ache of doing it all alone. 6 months since Sarah's death, and still the house felt like it belonged to a ghost. "Daddy?" The small, trembling voice behind him cut through the silence. He looked up to see his daughter, Emma, standing in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her blonde curls framed a sleepy face too soft for the harsh light of this world. "There's a monster under the bed," she whispered with absolute conviction. David managed a tired smile, pushing himself to his feet. "Then we'd better check, huh?" Her small hand fit inside his, like it was made for it. Together, they marched down the hall, the floor creaking under their mismatched footsteps. He dropped to one knee, shining his wristlight beneath the bed, nothing but dust and a missing sock. "All clear, Princess," he said. "No monsters tonight." She looked doubtful, as if monsters were very clever and might just be hiding better. "If one shows up," he added softly, tucking her in, "it'll have to get through me first." That earned him a sleepy giggle. "You always win," she murmured before drifting off. David lingered a moment, watching her chest rise and fall. Then he turned off the light and returned to the kitchen. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. He poured a small glass of whiskey reel, from Earth, the last bottle he'd ever owned, and sat on the couch, staring out at the snow. The colony's outer lights blinked faintly through the storm. He imagined Sarah sitting beside him, her hand resting over his, whispering that everything would be fine. It never was, but he liked pretending. Then came the knock. Soft at first. Then again, firmer. He blinked, setting the glass down. Nobody came this far out, after curfew. He checked the wall chronometer, 22:47, and reached instinctively for the sidearm he kept under the table. The knock came a third time. He moved to the door, checked the exterior camera, and frowned. A lone figure stood in the cold, a woman, hunched and small, her four-fingered hands trembling beneath layers of woven fabric. Her skin shimmered faintly violet under the security light. Fexilian, old. She looked lost, fragile, her silver hair streaked with frost. He hesitated. The colony had strict rules about unregistered off-worlders, especially after the Proxima incident. But as the wind pressed her slight form against the doorway, he felt something shift inside him. Sarah would have opened the door. He disengaged the lock. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked cautiously, keeping his body between her and the warmth of the room. Her amber eyes lifted to meet his, wide and weary. "Forgiveness, human friend," she said in a heavily accented voice. "My transport malfunction. Cold is unkind to old bones. Shelter, please. Only for night." Her tone was humble but dignified. David's instincts argued this could be trouble, but the raw vulnerability in her eyes silenced his caution. "Come in," he said finally, stepping aside. The woman exhaled in relief, bowing slightly as she entered. "Many thanks. I am Oren." Her voice carried a quiet melody even through fatigue. She moved with care, her limp subtle but noticeable. David gestured toward the couch. "Sit. I'll make tea." The kitchen filled with the soft clink of ceramic and the low hiss of the water heater. When he returned, Aren was studying the framed photos on the wall, one of Sarah, bright and laughing, her arm around a much younger David. "Your mate?" Aren asked gently. He froze for a heartbeat, then nodded. "She died. Terraforming accident." "Great sorrow," Aren murmured, placing a hand over her heart. "Pain changes never leaves. Only shape shifts." The words hit deeper than he expected. He passed her the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. Her skin was warm, too warm. She sipped carefully, both hands around the mug. "Your small one?" she asked after a pause. "Sleeping." "A brave spirit," she said, smiling faintly. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist, the cold, the bills, the loss. There was only the quiet sound of two survivors sharing warmth. Later, when David finally drifted off on the couch, the faint glow of the heating coils painting his face in amber light, Aren remained awake. She moved silently through the shadows, her limp gone, her eyes sharp with purpose. From beneath her woven shawl, she retrieved a small, disc-shaped device and activated it. A soft pulse of blue light flickered once, then vanished into the night sky. Transmission sent. She turned toward the sleeping man and his child, her expression softening. "Kindness is rarer among humans," she whispered in her native tongue. "Let us pray this one survives what comes next." The colony's dawn came without sunlight, only a gradual brightening of the sky as the atmospheric lamps shifted from night mode to pale gold. The illusion of morning fooled no one, least of all David Beck. He woke to the soft sound of laughter, an almost forgotten melody that made him jolt upright before realizing it wasn't Sarah's, it was Emma's. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, the couch springs creaking beneath him, and the smell of something cooking drifted from the kitchen. Not burning actual food. He blinked once more, disbelieving. There, in his kitchen, the elderly alien woman from last night was standing at the counter, humming a low, melodic tune as she flipped what appeared to be violet-hued pancakes on his old heat plate. Emma sat nearby, legs swinging, her stuffed rabbit propped beside her like an honored guest. "Aren makes purple breakfast," she declared when she saw him. David blinked, running a hand through his hair. "Does she now?" Aren turned, her silver bun catching the light. The small one woke early. I hope no offense, she was hungry. Her English carried that soft lilt again, the kind that made even apologies sound like poetry. "None taken," David said, crossing the room. "Just wasn't expecting a chef this morning." The Fexlian smiled faintly. "Purple grain from homeworld. Rich in nutrients. Good for growth. Also, pretty." She slid a pancake onto Emma's plate with surprising grace. David poured himself coffee lukewarm, but real, and leaned against the counter, watching the strange domestic tableau unfold. His daughter was smiling again, eyes bright, cheeks smeared with syrup. The sight both warmed and hurt him. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like a tomb. "You mentioned last night you were on your way to the Central District," he said finally. "To visit your granddaughter?" Aren's expression dimmed. "Yes, Lanaya. She studies at Human University. Bright, stubborn. Too much like me." Her voice faltered, and something in her tone made David look up. "You said your transport failed?" he asked carefully. Aren nodded, but didn't meet his gaze. "Yes, malfunction." The word sounded rehearsed. Before he could press further, a sudden heavy pounding echoed from the front door. Not a polite knock and order. David's instincts snapped into focus. He set down his mug, motioning for Emma to stay quiet. The pounding came again, accompanied by a metallic voice, amplified and cold. "Colonial security. Open immediately." Aren froze, her mug trembling in her four-fingered hands. "They found me," she whispered, color draining from her violet-tinged face. David frowned. What are you talking about? Who's they? Not security, she said quickly, her accent sharpening with fear. Hegemony agents, hunters. The voice outside barked again, this time in a guttural dialect distorted through a translator. David Beck, you are harboring a fugitive known as Iranex. Surrender her immediately or face prosecution under Galactic Compact law. David's mind raced. His training screamed caution, but the sight of Emma clutching her rabbit in terror anchored him. He crossed to the window and peeked through the side blind. 3 figures stood in the snow 2 draconids, their scaled armor gleaming under the colony's light, and 1 Jurgen enforcer towering behind them like a walking tank, all heavily armed. You've got about 30 seconds to tell me what the hell is going on, David said, voice low. Arin's trembling ceased. Her eyes hardened with sudden authority. I was researcher for Galactic Science Council. Found something dangerous. I want it. She reached into her cloak and revealed a small metallic medallion etched with the Council's sigil impossible to forge. If they take me, they will twist my discovery into weapon. Millions could die. That's a hell of a breakfast confession, David muttered, adrenaline spiking. And you came to my door, why? Because you opened it, she said simply. Because you are human who still remembers mercy. Another crash rattled the doorframe. The hunters were forcing entry. Daddy? Emma's small voice quivered. David dropped to one knee, meeting her frightened eyes. Remember our hide-and-seek gang? The one for emergencies? She nodded solemnly. Go get your backpack, the one with the rabbit patch, and meet me in the basement. Fast as you can. As she scrambled off, he turned to Orin. There's a maintenance tunnel beneath the house. We can use it to reach the lower sectors. Orin's relief was palpable. You will help me? You're under my roof, he said, checking the charge on his sidearm. That makes you my responsibility. A front door shrieked as metal gave way. Shouts in Draconid echoed through the hall. David grabbed Emma as she reappeared, hoisting her onto his hip. Quiet like a mouse, okay? She nodded, clutching her rabbit. They slipped into the basement, just as the door above exploded inward. Boots thundered through the kitchen, furniture crashing to the floor. David pressed his palm to a concealed panel behind the storage crates, revealing a narrow access hatch. The stale air that rushed out smelled of dust and ozone. Go, he whispered. Arang moved first, surprisingly agile despite her years. He passed Emma down to her, then followed, sealing the hatch behind them. The tunnel glowed faintly blue from emergency strips running along the ceiling. Their footsteps echoed off the metal. David led, pistol raised, Emma pressed against his chest, the hum of machinery vibrating beneath his boots. Behind him, Arin's breathing steadied, her fear replaced by grim determination. You said you were headed to the university, he said over his shoulder. Still our destination? Yes, my granddaughter Lanaya waits there. She has transport. She will know what to do. How far? 6 kilometers through maintenance grid, Arin replied. We must move quickly. And stay close, he said. Above them, distant thuds reverberated through the walls, the hunters spreading their search through the colony. Emma's tiny hand gripped his collar. Daddy, are we hiding from monsters? She whispered. David's throat tightened. Yeah, he said softly. But don't worry, Princess. This time, the monsters picked the wrong house. The tunnels beneath New Haven stretched like veins through the colony's bones, narrow corridors of metal and shadow, humming with the pulse of distant generators. The air was heavy with recycled oxygen and the faint scent of coolant. David Beck led the way, his sidearm raised, his daughter clinging silently to his chest, while the elderly Fexilian woman followed with surprising speed. her silver hair dimly reflecting the blue light strips that guided them forward. Behind them, faint tremors rippled through the steel wall's footsteps. Shouts, the echo of something large and methodical searching from above. They had only minutes of lead time before the hunters breached the access grid. "We can't outrun them forever," David muttered. "Where exactly are we going?" "University District," Aaron answered, her breath visible in the chill air. "Lanaya is there. My granddaughter. A scientist. She has ship, allies. Knowledge." She hesitated before adding, "If we reach her, hope still lives." "Hope," David said, his voice edged with irony, "isn't exactly in surplus around here." But he kept moving. He didn't trust the alien, not fully, but something about her conviction, about the way she'd shielded Emma without hesitation, kept him from walking away. He stopped at a junction where 3 tunnels met, consulting the outdated schematic etched faintly on the wall. This way, he decided, turning right toward a conduit that sloped upward. Aaron's footsteps slowed for a moment. "You trust me," she observed quietly. "Not sure I'd go that far," he replied. "But you haven't tried to kill me yet, so that's a start." She smiled faintly, her amber eyes glinting with something unreadable. "You remind me of Lanaya." Too cautious to admit courage. They moved in silence for several minutes before reaching a maintenance hatch sealed with a biometric lock. David set Emma down and examined the panel. "Security grade," he muttered, pulling a compact multi-tool from his belt. "Might take a minute." He pried off the outer casing and rewired the circuit manually, sparks briefly lighting his face. "You were security officer," Aaron said, watching his practiced efficiency. "Yeah," he said absently, until the job started feeling like policing ghosts. The lock hissed open with a click. He looked back to see Aaron holding Emma's hand, both framed in the faint glow. It struck him how natural the sight felt, this odd pair moving through danger like some fragile new family that shouldn't exist, but somehow did. The hatch opened into a dimly lit storage corridor. Dust floated in the shafts of pale, light filtering from vents above. Ahead stood a reinforced door marked U-17 Research Access. Aaron exhaled shakily. "We are close." But as David reached for the control pad, a sudden metallic clang reverberated through the duct behind them. The tunnel lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. "They found us," he said. Aaron's expression hardened. "Then we run faster." He ushered them through the door, sealing it behind him just as a distant roar echoed down the tunnel. Draconid battle cry that made Emma bury her face in his shoulder. The corridor beyond opened into an abandoned research annex. Equipment lay scattered across metal tables, glass vials reflecting the sterile white light of overhead strips. A faint hum came from deeper inside a generator, still functional. Then a voice rang out, calm but sharp. "Identify yourselves." David froze. From the shadows ahead, a tall figure emerged, holding a pulse rifle steady. She was unmistakably Fexelian, but younger graceful. Her skin a soft amethyst hue, her hair silver white cropped at her shoulders. Her eyes glowed faint amber in the dimness. "Lanaya," Aaron breathed. "It's me." The rifle lowered instantly. "Grandmother?" The young alien hurried forward, disbelief and relief warring on her face. "By the stars, I thought." Her words cut short as she noticed David and the small child behind him. "And these?" "Allies," Aaron said simply. "They gave me shelter." Lene's gaze flicked to David, assessing, calculating. "A human security officer," she said. "Either very brave or very foolish." "Usually both," David replied dryly. "Now, if we're done with introductions, we've got company on the way." Alarms began to pulse faintly overhead, the soft, rhythmic thrum of motion sensors activating. They've breached the tunnel grid, Lanaya confirmed, rushing to a console. Her fingers flew across the holographic interface, locking down secondary access points. They'll be here within minutes. David moved beside her. Any defenses? Some, she said, her tone clipped. Not built for war. Then improvise, he muttered. I'm good at that. Lanaya glanced at him sidelong. You don't look like a soldier. I was, he said, until I had someone worth living for. The word surprised even him. Laya's expression softened for a heartbeat before she returned to her work. When the door at the far end of the lab exploded inward, all talk ceased. 3 Draconids charged through the smoke, their armor reflecting the white light, weapons drawn. David dove for cover, firing short controlled bursts from his sidearm. The air filled with the crackling hiss of plasma fire. Lanaya moved like liquid light, precise, graceful, deadly. Her rifle sang in short pulses of blue energy, each shot dropping an attacker with inhuman precision. 1 Draconid made it through, slamming into a table and overturning it toward her. David reacted before thinking, tackling the creature low and driving his elbow into the junction of armor plates at its neck. The alien roared, clawed at his arm, but David's strike found its mark a weak point under the chin. The Draconid fell, armor smoking. Silence followed, broken only by the hum of damaged lights. Lanaya lowered her weapon and exhaled. Not bad for a human, she said. You either, David replied, chest heaving. Their eyes met wariness, melting into something like understanding. Aaron moved quickly between them. We must go. More will come? Lanaya nodded, grabbing a sealed container from the lab bench. The data core, she explained when David looked at it. The last uncorrupted record of our species. What they want and what we must keep from them at all cost. Then let's move, David said. You've got a ship, right? Docking Bay 17, she confirmed, already typing commands into her wrist console. But the route will be heavily monitored. We'll figure it out. He lifted Emma, who blinked up at Lanaya with innocent curiosity. Is she one of the stars? The child whispered. Lanaya paused, startled. Then, with a small smile, she said, Perhaps, little one. Perhaps I am. For a fleeting moment, amid the chaos and smoke, something wordless passed between the 3 of them, a fragile thread of trust woven through fire. It was gone as quickly as it came when the alarms began to wail again, red lights flaring along the corridor. They've locked onto this sector, Lanaya said. We have to move now. David adjusted his grip on Emma and nodded. Then lead the way, Doctor. Not doctor, she corrected as they ran. Just a woman trying to keep her people alive. He gave a grim smile. Guess that makes 2 of us. And together, with Aaron limping close behind, they disappeared into the labyrinth of the colony's underbelly. As the walls trembled with the arrival of their pursuers, the maintenance, tunnels ended abruptly in a freight shaft that opened onto the lower levels of the colony's central district. The air here thicker with humidity and the metallic tang of coolant vapors. David led the group out into the open, his pulse still thrumming from the firefight in the lab. They moved through narrow service corridors, stacked with storage crates and humming power conduits. Guided by Lanaya's wrist display, which flickered with faint blue light as she traced a secure route to the spaceport. The colony above their heads pulsed with false daylight, the ceiling panels projecting a serene blue sky to hide the chaos brewing below. How far? David asked, scanning corners as they passed. 2 sectors, Lanaya replied, her tone clipped, professional. Docking Bay 17. Tarn will be waiting, Tarn. He said, raising a brow. Old friend? Old debt, she corrected, her eyes flicking toward him briefly. A Krell smuggler. Dangerous, but loyal. Arin's breathing had grown shallow, her limp more pronounced, though she refused to slow. Go, she urged when David glanced back. These bones slower than heart. You're doing fine, he said, adjusting Emma in his arms. The little girl had fallen asleep against his shoulder, exhaustion finally winning over fear. She trusts you, Lanaya observed softly. She trusts kindness, David replied. She's too young to know better. A faint smile ghosted across Lanaya's lips, there and gone. The passage ahead opened into a wider transit corridor where automated trams once carried goods between sectors. Most of the rails were dark now, abandoned since the last budget cuts. Overhead, the low whine of security drones echoed faintly too close for comfort. Lania stopped suddenly, her amber eyes narrowing as she studied a junction ahead. Checkpoint, she whispered. Through the grated walkway, David could see uniformed officers scanning ID chips at a security gate. We'll never get through with her, he said, nodding to Arin. Not unless you've got a miracle in that bag. Not miracle, Arin murmured, reaching into her cloak. She pulled out a small vial filled with shimmering silver fluid. Appearance modifier. Bio-optic nanogel. Temporary disguise. Side effects? David asked, already knowing the answer from the strain in her voice. It draws from life energy, Lanaya said, frowning. You can't? We have no choice, Arin interrupted. Better one old body weaken than all perish. Without waiting for protest, she unstoppered the vial and drank. The change was slow and terrible, her violet skin paling, her amber eyes dulling to human brown, her facial ridges softening into age-worn wrinkles. Within seconds, an elderly human woman stood before them, trembling but unrecognizable. David exhaled, shaken. You're sure you can move? I have lived through worse, she said with quiet defiance. We go now. Lanaya took Emma gently from David's arms. You and Arin pass as travelers, she said quickly. I'll take the child another way meet you beyond the checkpoint. Bay 17. David hesitated. The thought of letting Emma out of his reach made every instinct rebel. Lanaya seemed to sense it, her expression softening. I will protect her with my life, she promised. On my ancestors' memory. David studied her eyes, the strange inner light flickering within them, and finally nodded. She likes to hold her rabbit when she sleeps, he said quietly. Don't let her lose it. Never, Lanaya said, adjusting the small girl in her arms. Go. David turned toward the checkpoint with Arin beside him. He slipped his security badge into his belt where it would be visible, squared his shoulders, and walked with the bored confidence of a man doing his job. The guard barely glanced at them as they passed. Special escort detail for Ambassador Keller, David muttered, flashing the badge. Diplomatic clearance. The officer yawned, waved them through. They made it 3 steps beyond the scanners before a Draconid patrol entered the far side of the concourse. Arin's eyes darted toward them. They hunt. Keep walking, David murmured, guiding her toward an access corridor. We just need... The world exploded into chaos. A klaxon blared as the Draconids began scanning the crowd, their weapons gleaming. David grabbed Arin's arm and veered down a side hall. This way. He spotted an environmental control panel along the wall, sprinted toward it, and yanked open the casing. His fingers flew across the controls. What are you doing? Arin hissed. Buying time, he replied. He overloaded the humidity regulators, and a moment later the corridor filled with a dense mist. Alarms screamed, visibility dropping to 0. Go, he shouted, pushing Arin toward the exit. They stumbled through the fog, emerging onto the outer concourse, where ships loomed like metal beasts under the blue-white glow of the docking lamps. Above, automated announcements blared over the intercom system malfunction. Please evacuate to designated safe zones. David Beck. The voice cut through the chaos, deep and resonant. He spun around, pulse hammering, and saw Lanaya standing near a descending boarding ramp, Emma still in her arms. Behind her, a massive reptilian figure with blue-scaled skin and glowing tattoos leaned against the ramp's railing, glaring impatiently. "Tarn, I presume," David muttered. "Move!" Lanaya shouted. The Krell smuggler growled something unintelligible and slapped a control pad. The ramp began to retract even as David sprinted forward, pulling Aaron along. Plasma fire ripped through the air behind them, sizzling against the deck plates. He dove at the ramp's edge, catching the lip with one arm and hauling Aaron up beside him. The ramp sealed shut with a heavy clang. A heartbeat later, the ship's engines roared to life. David collapsed against the wall, gasping. Lanaya met his eyes, relief flickering across her face. "Cutting it close, human." "Wanted to make an entrance," he said between breaths. The Krell pilot barked something in his guttural tongue, and Lanaya replied sharply. "He says hold on," she translated as the ship lurched upward, breaking through the colony's containment shield. David staggered to the viewport and watched as New Haven fell away below them, shrinking into a cluster of lights against the planet's endless dark. For the first time in months, he felt weightless in more ways than one. Lanaya set Emma gently on a cot near the cockpit, covering her with a thermal blanket. Aaron sank into a seat, her disguise already flickering at the edges. David turned to Lanaya, his voice low but steady. "Now that we're out of immediate danger, maybe you can tell me what exactly we've gotten ourselves into." She looked at him, her amber eyes reflecting the starlight outside the viewport. "You deserve the truth," she said softly. "But I fear once you hear it, you will wish you'd left your door closed." "Too late for that," he said. "Try me." She drew a deep breath, fingers tracing the edge of the glowing container that held the data core. "My people's extinction was not an accident," she began. "It was engineered. And your species, your government, was complicit." David froze, the hum of the ship fading beneath the weight of her words. "What are you saying?" "The Fexilian genome was studied, dissected, replicated. The hegemony wants our abilities, our energy resonance for their soldiers. But Earth helped them start." Her voice trembled not with fear, but fury. "And now the proof rests in that core. If they get it, they will finish what they began." David leaned back, jaw tight. "So why trust me?" "Because," she said, her voice softening, "when no one else would, you opened your door." The words struck him like a pulse blast, echoing the night he'd first seen her in the snow. For a long moment, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the steady thrum of the engines. Then a soft whimper came from the cot Emma, stirring, half awake, her small voice barely a whisper. "Daddy?" He crossed to her side, brushing her hair back gently. "It's okay, Princess. We're safe." "We?" she murmured, eyes fluttering open. "Yeah," he said, glancing toward Lanaya. "We." The ship slipped into the vast quiet of hyperspace, the stars stretching into threads of light. In that moment, David Beck realized the line between strangers and family had blurred beyond recognition. And somewhere deep down, he knew the hardest part of their journey had only just begun. The hum of hyperspace filled the cabin like a heartbeat steady, low, and almost soothing, if not for the tension coiled beneath every breath. David sat near the viewport, watching streaks of starlight race by, his hand absently tracing the faint scratch on his wrist where a draconid claw had grazed him earlier. The pain was minor, but the memory of it wasn't. Across the cabin, Lanaya crouched beside her grandmother, her glow faint and pulsing irregularly, like a dying ember. Aaron's transformation had faded completely. Her true violet skin now looked ashen, her breathing shallow. "She's getting worse," David said quietly, standing. Lanaya's jaw tightened as she adjusted a scanner. The modifier serum accelerated her cellular decay. It draws directly from the life flow. At her age, she didn't finish the sentence. Can you help her? He asked. Her eyes lifted to his, amber and burning with guilt. Yes, but what I must do, it will cost me. Then do it, David said simply. Lanaya hesitated, glancing toward Emma, who sat curled on the cot, half asleep with a rabbit clutched tight. She shouldn't see. I'll take her to the cockpit, he said, but Lanaya shook her head. No, you should stay. If something goes wrong, I'll need someone to stop me. Her tone made his chest tighten. Stop you? Our energy transfer is powerful, dangerous if uncontrolled. It can take more than I intend to give. Aren's weak voice interrupted, barely a whisper. No arguments, child. You do this, or old woman dies with regret. Grandmother, now, she rasped, her eyes closing. Lanaya swallowed hard and nodded. David watched as she removed the outer layer of her uniform, revealing beneath it a fitted garment that shimmered faintly with embedded energy conduits. She knelt beside Aren and placed her hands one over her heart, one at her temple. Then she exhaled slowly, and light bloomed. It began as a faint pulse, then spread through her veins in golden lines, illuminating her from within. The glow deepened, brightened, until the entire cabin was bathed in living radiance. David shielded his eyes, stunned. The air seemed to vibrate with heat and soundless power, a low hum that resonated in his chest like a second heartbeat. Aren's frail body arched slightly as the energy flowed into her breathing steadying, color returning to her cheeks. But the transfer took its toll. Lanaya trembled, sweat beading on her brow, her breath quickening. Enough, David said, stepping forward, but she didn't hear him or wouldn't stop. The glow intensified, her body trembling with effort until, with a soft cry, she collapsed forward into his arms. The light faded slowly, leaving the ship dim once more. Aren was breathing deeply now, peacefully asleep, but Lanaya sagged against him, her skin fever-warm. You're burning up, he said, easing her onto a seat. It will pass, she murmured weakly. It always passes. You shouldn't have risked it. Would you not risk for your child? She countered softly. He hesitated. She's your family. I get that. Laya's gaze met his, fierce despite her exhaustion. And what are you, David Beck? A stranger? You risked your life for one old alien and her secrets. Why? Because it was right, he said simply. Because I couldn't stand by and do nothing again. His voice caught on the last word. She tilted her head. Again? For a moment, he didn't answer. The hum of the ship filled the silence. Then he said quietly, Sarah, my wife, she was a medical officer. There was an outbreak at the terraforming site. She volunteered to stay behind when containment failed. Saved hundreds. Died alone. I promised myself I'd never stand still while someone else paid the price again. Lanaya studied him, something soft unfolding behind her guarded expression. Then she would be proud, she said. The words hit him harder than any plasma blast. Before he could reply, the deck shuddered violently beneath them. The overhead lights flickered red, alarms wailing. What now? He muttered, sprinting for the cockpit. The Krell pilot, Tarn, was already there, his scaled fingers flying over the controls. Power fluctuation. He growled. Drive instability. We are dropping from hyperspace. Outside the viewport, the stars blurred back into single points of light, revealing a blue-green planet below. Lanaya stumbled into the cockpit behind him. Can you stabilize? Negative, Tarn snarled. Primary conduit fried. We land or we die. Where are we? David asked. The Krell's slitted eyes flicked over the readout. Proxima Outpost. Abandoned Terran mining world. Perfect, David muttered. Nowhere with a view. Strap in. Tarn barked. The ship hit atmosphere with a roar, the hull screaming under the pressure. Alarms blared as systems failed one by one. David secured Emma in a crash harness, then braced himself around her, shielding her with his body. Launaya gripped the co-pilot's console, knuckles white. Angle 15 degrees down, she shouted. There's a clearing near the lake. I see it. Tarn roared back. The ship slammed through clouds, engine sputtering, then struck the ground in a thunderous slide that sent sparks and debris flying. For a moment, the world was noise and motion. Then silence. David opened his eyes. The cabin was tilted, smoke curling from cracked panels, the air filled with the acrid scent of burned circuits. Everyone okay? He rasped. Tarn coughed. Still alive. Lanaya unbuckled herself, stumbling toward him. Emma? She's fine, David said, checking the girl's pulse. She stirred faintly, unharmed. Arin? Alive, the older woman croaked from the floor, her voice hoarse but steady. Though my spine disagrees. We need to move, Lanaya said, glancing toward the viewport. Through the cracked glass, she could see distant lights descending through the clouds' hegemony dropships. They followed the surge. We have minutes. Tarn retrieved a plasma rifle and a small pack of supplies. Nearest structure is 10 kilometers north old mining complex. Then that's where we go, David said. He slung Emma's backpack over his shoulder, checked his weapon, and nodded to Lanaya. Can your grandmother travel? She will, Lanaya said grimly. Arin straightened with quiet defiance, leaning on a broken pipe for support. These bones still move when needed. They stepped into the open air. The landscape stretched out before them, ashen soil, skeletal trees, a frozen lake reflecting the pale light of the planet's dying sun. Smoke billowed from the wreck behind them, curling into the cold sky. David tightened his grip on his daughter's hand and looked at Lanaya. What are the odds we make it? Slim, she said, her voice steady. But you humans are stubborn. Perhaps that will tip the balance. You have no idea, he said. And together, they began their trek toward the distant mining outpost as the shadows of descending ships grew larger in the sky. The light from the wreckage faded behind them as they crossed the frozen valley. The sky above bruised with violet and gray. The air was thin here, carrying the metallic taste of old industry and burned ozone. David led the way through knee-deep frost, every crunch of his boots swallowed by the empty vastness. Emma rode against his chest, wrapped in his jacket, her small arms clinging to him like roots refusing to let go. Behind him, Lanaya supported her grandmother, the faint shimmer of her energy glow pulsing in time with each labored breath. The ruined mining facility rose ahead like a ghost city, jagged metal towers silhouetted against the pale horizon. We'll make a stand there, David said, scanning the perimeter through his visor. Walls, high ground, narrow entry points. Good choice, Lanaya murmured. You think like a soldier. Habit, he replied. Hard to shake the old training. She smiled faintly, though exhaustion dulled the warmth in her eyes. And yet you fight not for conquest, but for home. That makes you dangerous. They reached the main gate, its control panel half buried in snow, lights long dead. David pried open the casing and bypassed the circuit manually. The gate shuddered and opened with a metallic groan. Inside, the base was a graveyard of old machines, rusted conveyor lines, and dormant processing towers stretching into darkness. We'll set up in the processing chamber, he said, leading them through the corridors. One entrance, reinforced doors. Good choke point. Lanaya nodded, adjusting her grip on Orin. The older Fexlian was fading fast again, her skin losing color. She's running on willpower, Lanaya said softly. It won't last forever. Then we make this count, David replied. In the main chamber, he powered up the backup generators. The dim blue lights flickered to life, casting long shadows across the walls. Tarn, the Krell, was already securing the perimeter, his heavy footsteps echoing like drums. Scanners pick up inbound craft, he growled. 3 dropships. 10 minutes. We'll have to hold until help arrives, David said, setting his rifle on the railing. If help comes, Tarn muttered. Lanaya moved to a console and began linking the CUM system to the damaged ship's transponder. I can boost our distress beacon, she said. Maybe the Colonial Defense Fleet will intercept it. Do it, David said. He crouched beside Emma, who was crouched behind a supply crate, eyes wide but steady. You remember our game, Princess? Hide and seek? She nodded. Hide quiet as a bunny, she whispered. That's my girl. He kissed her forehead and handed her the stuffed rabbit. Stay with Aaron. Don't move unless I say, okay, Daddy. Aaron smiled weakly, resting a 4-fingered hand over Emma's. Brave little one. Light shines brightest in small vessels. Emma smiled at her, and for a moment, the fear in the room softened. Then the alarms began to blare. They're here, Tarn said. David moved to the entrance, taking position behind a rusted control console, rifle raised. Lanaya stood beside him, her skin flickering faintly with inner light. Ready? He asked. Always. The first explosion rocked the chamber, dust raining from the ceiling. The heavy blast door dented inward, glowing orange under the cut of plasma torches. Steady, David murmured. He counted each second in his head, the old combat rhythm returning like muscle memory. The door burst open, and the first wave of Draconid soldiers stormed through, scales glinting in the flickering light. David fired in short bursts, precise and measured, dropping the front line before they could fan out. Lanaya moved like lightning, energy arcing from her hands in ribbons of blue that struck with surgical precision. Tarn roared, his heavy rifle thundering as he tore through the flank. But for every enemy that fell, 2 more poured in. There's too many. Tarn shouted. Hold the line. David barked. His shoulder burned where a plasma bolt grazed him, but he ignored it, reloading in one smooth motion. Lanaya crouched beside him, sweat glistening on her temple, her energy pulsing brighter, fiercer. They're pushing us back, she said. Then we push harder. He gritted his teeth, firing again until the rifle overheated. The door to the far lab blew open suddenly, and a towering Jurgen enforcer stepped through, its armor gleaming like obsidian. It raised its weapon, energy crackling at the muzzle. Lanaya shouted something in her language and thrust both hands forward. A blast of golden light erupted from her palms, colliding with the Jurgen's chest and sending it crashing backward into the wall. The chamber shook. David turned, awe and worry colliding in his chest. That was new. Desperation, she said, breathing hard. It sharpens the focus. Then a cry pierced the Chaos Arin's voice, sharp and terrified. David spun just in time to see a plasma round detonate near their position, throwing debris across the room. The data core, once sealed beside the old scientist, had cracked open. Emma stood before it, eyes wide as luminous energy poured out in swirling strands of blue and violet, dancing like ribbons of light. The entire room froze. The Draconids hesitated, momentarily stunned by the radiance filling the air. Emma! David shouted, sprinting toward her, but Lanaya reached her first, shielding the child as the energy coiled around them both. No, she whispered, realization dawning in her voice. It's resonating with her. Arin staggered to her feet, her eyes wide with awe. She carries the echo. The fusion. What are you talking about? David demanded, reaching them. The light intensified until it hummed like a heartbeat. Your wife, Lanaya said, voice trembling. Sarah. She was part of the Cygnus medical project, wasn't she? Yeah, she had some treatment during the pregnancy, he said, confusion and fear warring in his voice. Experimental gene therapy, something about immune deficiency. Lanaya's eyes filled with wonder. Not human therapy. Fexilian, your daughter. She carries our code. She is both. Human and Fexilian. The bridge. The light pulsed outward, filling the chamber. Emma raised her hands, and the glowing strands responded, weaving together into a single spiraling form that surged back into the data core, sealing it with a hum of finality. The air stilled. The draconids nearest the door stumbled back, disoriented, as the ceiling trembled with the sound of distant engines. Contact. Tarn shouted. Colonial ships inbound. Through the cracked viewport, the sky erupted with fire as the Intrepid and its escort fleet dropped from orbit, guns blazing. Plasma fire lit the horizon, burning through the hegemony's landing craft like paper. Reinforcements, David breathed. Thank God. The Draconid commander barked an order, retreating with the remnants of his squad as explosions thundered outside. Lanaya slumped to her knees, exhausted but alive, her glow fading. David crouched beside her, gripping her shoulders. It's over, he said softly. She looked up at him, eyes bright with something beyond exhaustion. No, she whispered. It's beginning. Minutes later, the Colonial Marines stormed the facility. Captain Reyes herself arrived with the extraction team, a woman of iron-gray hair and calm authority. She took one look at the scene, at the cracked data core and the glowing child, and ordered immediate evacuation. Hours later, aboard the Intrepid, the battle was a distant memory. The ship hummed with quiet efficiency, stars glittering beyond the viewport. In the medical bay, Emma slept peacefully, her vitals steady. She's stabilizing, the medic reported. Her genetic structures, unprecedented. She's perfectly balanced. Half Fexilian, Lanaya murmured, standing beside David. Half human. Proof that coexistence isn't just possible, it's evolution. David looked at her, the corners of his mouth curving into a tired smile. Guess humanity's finally done something right. Lanaya turned toward him, her expression soft. You did something right. You opened the door. The memory of that snowy night flickered in his mind. The knock, the decision, the quiet act of kindness that had started everything. And I'd open it again, he said. Their eyes met, and in the sterile glow of the medical bay, the distance between them vanished. She leaned forward, her lips brushing his warm and electric. The kiss was brief, but full of promise of two worlds no longer strangers. Months later on Earth, the snows of New Haven seemed like a distant dream. In a green valley beneath real sunlight, David watched as Emma and Lanaya played together, small sparks of blue light dancing between their fingertips. Arin sat nearby, restored and content, her gaze distant but peaceful. Humanity and Fixilian scientists worked side by side in a nearby dome, rebuilding what had been lost, guided by the data core and by the child who had restored it. David stood in the doorway of their new home, the same gesture that had changed everything. Lanaya looked back at him, her amber eyes glowing softly. We opened it together, she said. Then let's never close it, he replied, stepping forward to join them as the sunlight spilled across the field, and the stars far above seemed to burn just a little brighter.